Hey everybody, my name is Matt Smith. I talk about college football. We have our Week 9 SEC preview today. Pretty light schedule. We got six teams on a bye: Alabama, Arkansas, Auburn, Texas A&M, South Carolina, Tennessee. All will have this weekend off. So just four games, all conference games, kind of group two in the late afternoon, two in prime time. So we'll go through these games here, touch on some of the bigger national games as well, and give you some best bets and wrap it up. So let's start with the cocktail party. Probably not the best game. You could argue it's only the third best game in the league on Saturday, but it is Georgia, Florida. It is the number one team in the country, and does Florida have a chance? I think the quarterback situation is interesting because both teams are kind of uncertain about who the guy's going to be. Stetson Bennett started the last 4 or 5 games for the Dogs. Is JT Daniels healthy? If he is healthy, will he even be the guy? Are we going to have a situation like last year again? I don't know. It's weird. So hard to get a read on that. I think the JT Daniels does give Georgia a higher ceiling, but I think the difference is smaller than you're getting with Florida, where Emory Jones and Anthony Richardson. I think with Richardson, you get a pretty high ceiling, but it's a lower floor than Jones. And I think that's a concern for Dan Mullen, is that he trusts himself enough to come up with a game plan with Emory Jones where he can still compete in this game and give Georgia's defense some problems. So I'd go with Richardson, but it sounds like Mullen may be leaning toward Jones, potentially on the heels of a bad interception at the end of the LSU game for Richardson. But either way, I kind of do trust Mullen to come up with something to at least test this Georgia defense. I do think Florida can crack 20 points. It's been 6 weeks now, but Alabama 31, Florida 29 did happen. They were in that game, came down to a tying 2-point conversion. And that was a really impressive day for both Mullen and that entire Gators team. So Georgia might be a notch or two ahead of Bama. We don't know. We'll probably find out in a month. But I do think Florida can at least throw some punches at Georgia. That number at 14 kind of concerns me because I think it's a situation where Florida can really hang tough and keep this a 7 to 10 point game, and then just a late score, late pick six or something puts Georgia over the number. So that's kind of where I am with this. I think Florida challenges Georgia's defense more than any team has done this year by far. I think they get to 20 points, but I'm still going to lay the points and take Georgia. I'm thinking like 38 to 20. That defense has kind of been feast or famine for the Gators. LSU lit them up. They played well at times, held Tennessee in check, did a really nice job there. For the most part, Alabama had a couple bursts on them, but they did a pretty good job after weathering the storm early against Alabama. So it's Todd Grantham's unit. It's feast or famine. But I do think Georgia's a pretty good day on offense and gets into the upper 30s. So I'm going 38 to 20 Georgia. That number's tough. It seems kind of low given what we've seen from these two teams of late. But it is a rivalry game. Dan Mullen did fare well as a heavy underdog against Alabama earlier this year. So I think that's why the line is 13-14 as opposed to more like 17 or 18. But I am going to lay the points. It's Georgia. Why not? But I do think it's a decent game. I think Florida can get a score early. If you get a couple field goals, keep this thing, 13-10, 17-10 at the half maybe, and really have a shot. All the pressure, of course, is on Georgia. Florida's out of the SEC East race. They're just playing to spoil a season for their bitter rivals. So I think they'll fare well, but Georgia will prevail, stay number one, and will be number one in the first CFP rankings when they come out on Tuesday. The game of the day, maybe the game of the day nationally, it's right up there with Michigan State down on the Plains. Ole Miss-Auburn, that's your ESPN primetime game. Got the A-team crew with Sean McDonough and Todd Blackledge. Fascinating matchup there. You got some key advantages for Auburn here. They're rested. They got a confident quarterback who's been playing really good football since he almost lost his job a month ago against Georgia State and Bo Nix. You got a front seven who's been pretty good against the run, and with Ole Miss really wanting to run the football, we saw it emphasized last week. I think that does play a bit into Auburn's hands. Conversely, you got the best player in the country wearing red, blue, powder, white, whatever they're going to be decked out in for the Rebels on Saturday night. But Matt Corral's the best player in the country right now. They got two really good play callers styling up this game plan and the play calls in Lane Kiffin and Jeff Lebby. And you got a defense that's really improving, played really well the past couple of weeks. Held Tennessee to just 26 points, held LSU to really 7. They had a couple scores in garbage time there when the game was out of hand. But a really good performance again. They're starting to stack good defensive performances now, coming out of giving up 51 to Arkansas a few weeks back. So I really like where this Ole Miss defense is. You got the magic of Jordan-Hare Stadium to deal with at night if you're Ole Miss. So my preseason predictions, I had Ole Miss 6-1 in this game. That is the case. I had Auburn 5-2 in this game. That is the case. I picked Auburn to win it, thinking that Ole Miss would be coming down a bit from an emotional high against beating LSU. Now, it wasn't really that emotional of a game. It was a big day, but they controlled that game, and it wasn't like down to the wire or anything like that. So maybe that helps Ole Miss from a mental tiredness perspective in that they took care of business and were able to bury that game pretty quick, I would think, and turn the page to Auburn. But it's Jordan-Hare Stadium. It's that night. Crowd's going to be rowdy. Tigers still control their own destiny in the SEC West. I think this might be just a bit too tough of a task for Lane Kiffin and Matt Corral. With so many injuries now on both sides of the ball, they're banged up. Matt Corral's had to do it all. They really, really need that running game to work, and I had my doubt that it'll be as successful as it was a week ago against LSU. So I'm going to take Auburn at 2.5. Usually just going to lay the points there. I think it probably comes in a 3-4 point game. 31-28. I think that's an under. Over-unders, I think, in the mid-60s. So not a strong lean very much on side or total there. But I will take Auburn to stay alive and control their destiny in the SEC West race with the big November looming with Texas A&M coming up a week from Saturday, and then, of course, the Iron Bowl Thanksgiving weekend. And the other interesting game, Kentucky-Mississippi State. I'm wondering, can this be different than 2020? It was 24-2 Wildcats last year in Lexington. Mississippi State had 6 interceptions. Will Rogers did play in that game. He didn't start, but he threw 2 of them. So how can this game be that much different 1 year later? I think Mark Stoops had a good handle on the air raid. We know what Mississippi State wants to do. It's not going to be too much different from what they saw last year. We saw Alabama handle this offense last year. Mississippi State be unable to adjust this year. All they got was a couple field goals. So I have my doubts whether Mississippi State can move the ball with much success against the Wildcats, and the contrast of styles, if you like that, of course. State's going to throw 60 passes. Kentucky wants to run the ball 45, 50 times in this game. So I think it comes down to, can Kentucky get their usual 1 or 2 big plays in the passing game they've been getting? Even against Georgia, they hit a couple. It didn't matter because they couldn't sustain it, and Georgia was able to get to 30 points. But I think if they can do that, even playing on the road in Starkville, I think they can do enough to get by. So I think it's a kind of an ugly, low-scoring game. I got it 23-17 Kentucky. Again, I just go back to last year and how one-sided that was. I think that's a big hill to overcome in 12 months for Mississippi State to get all those things figured out, even at home. So I'm going to take Kentucky about 1.5, 2 points right now. I'd lay those points and take the Wildcats to move to 7-1 and certainly keep New Year's Six bowl hopes alive. CFP hopes is going to be tough, but we'll see how that shakes out later in November. But still, a possible, maybe their toughest game left on the schedule for the Wildcats. Tennessee comes to town next week. It's one of those 2 games probably. If they get this one, I think you can head to November. That 11-1 is at least on the table. Again, you have some more 50-50 games with Tennessee and Louisville. But if you go into Starkville at night and win this game, that says a lot about Kentucky, whose resume is still pretty thin at this point, despite having some brand name wins over Florida and LSU. But we've seen the train wrecks those programs have become. Going to Starkville, beat a team that went to College Station and won just a couple weeks back. That'd be a heck of a win for Mark Stoops and probably the best one this season since it is coming on the road. And finally, Missouri and Vanderbilt. The line's pretty high. It's about 16-17. You kind of wonder, all right, well, is Missouri that much better than South Carolina, who beat Vanderbilt by a point? But similar to Ole Miss-Auburn, you got a rested Missouri team. You got Vanderbilt playing for the 9th consecutive week. They're the last team to not have their off week. They'll be off a week from Saturday. So situationally, this does favor into Missouri's hands. I think they can kind of just outscore Vanderbilt despite their defensive struggles, and maybe they figured some stuff out in the off week. Hopefully, it was so bad there in that stretch of early October against the likes of Tennessee and Texas A&M and such. Maybe they can keep the points down for Vanderbilt, who, of course, has been shut out by Florida, been shut out by Georgia. Picked it up a little bit against South Carolina, but then back to field goals only last week against Mississippi State. So I think it could be a tight game into the second half, but Missouri's just going to run away from them. So I think I'd lay the points. That number seems high. I think Missouri can get into the 40s, so maybe a 42-21, 42-24 win for the Tigers to get back on track and at least keep slim bowl hopes alive as the calendar turns to November. So that's it. Full slate of games coming up next week. Again, all but Vanderbilt will be done with the off weeks after this Saturday. So we got 7 games next week, 6 conference games, and then Hugh Freeze's return with Liberty to Oxford to take on Ole Miss. So the schedule will crank back up. We had 2 pretty light weeks in the SEC. But again, I think 3 of these 4 games are pretty intriguing if you believe Florida can hang around with Georgia. And I think they will. I think it'll be a decent game. Cocktail Party doesn't usually give you much entertainment. If you kind of think about it, what's your favorite cocktail party memory as a neutral observer. I don't know if you have one. There's been a couple good games here and there, but some ugly ones in the Rep Muschamp era. Just compare that to Oklahoma, Texas. It just doesn't seem to dazzle like Oklahoma, Texas usually does. I don't know if it's the setting there, being in a more sterile stadium like Jacksonville compared to the tradition and history of the Cotton Bowl. I don't know, but Florida, Georgia, I think to the neutral observer just doesn't do what Oklahoma, Texas does to them. So we'll see. Maybe we get a good one on Saturday. Again, all the pressure in the world on Georgia. Florida fared well in this spot earlier in the season against Alabama. And again, I don't think they come out on top. I don't think they're even as close as they were against Alabama. But I think they will land some punches for the first time really all year against this Georgia defense. We'll go through the national slate here a bit. Last week it was kind of weird. We had all the games condensed in that 3:30 window, and this Saturday I think basically the 3:30 window is the lightest of the four. So we'll go through in kind of chronological order. Game of the day: Michigan State. That's your big noon Fox game. ESPN Game Day's there. Fox will have their pregame show there. Michigan about a 4.5-point favorite. Two really good defenses. Michigan State was off last week. That could help them. Playing at home could help them. And I think Kenneth Walker, potential Heisman candidate, certainly the best non-quarterback Heisman candidate, transfer from Wake Forest, having a big year, his first true spotlight game. I think we worry about Michigan State not necessarily being overrated, but just sneaking by some teams. Beat Indiana by 5. I had to go to overtime to beat Nebraska, but everybody struggles with Nebraska. Oklahoma struggled with Nebraska, and Michigan needed a late field goal to survive when they played Nebraska, so I don't really ding them too much for that. I think this is a very good, well-coached, physical team. They are a heavy penalized team. That's one thing to watch is penalties. The Spartans are in the hundreds in the penalty yards per game rankings, but they're playing at home. If you get it in a rivalry game, a big game, sometimes the crews are more inclined to just let them play. I think they can overcome that. So at 4.5, I kind of like Michigan State outright in this game. I think Michigan's fine. I don't think either team is necessarily overrated based on what we've seen beyond Georgia, Alabama, and Ohio State this year. I think they're perfectly fine, ranked as top 10 teams, and could end up finishing that way. But I'm going to take the Spartans in this one. Should be a good battle. Two great uniforms, great rivalry, and that should be a fun one in the first of these Big Ten East round robin games we have coming up over the next 4 to 5 weeks. Also in that window, Texas and Baylor, fun game in the Big 12. Texas still has some slim hopes to get to the Big 12 title game. If they lose that, it'll be 3 conference losses, 3 in a row actually. And they'll be out. So huge game for the Longhorns. Obviously, all the Texas schools love to beat UT, so it should be a fired up crowd there in Waco. Fun one there. That's your ABC noon game. Big Ten West, potentially a de facto title game. Gophers are still in it, but Iowa and Wisconsin in this one up in Madison. Badgers playing a bit better, but it's all run game and defense. Graham Mertz has not improved since his disastrous September and those losses to Penn State and Notre Dame and Michigan. Last 3 games, the Badgers are 3-0, remember. He's 23 of 42, 264, no touchdowns, 1 interception. So he's not doing much. 264 yards in 3 games, no touchdowns. This isn't the quarterback carrying the load. So against Iowa's defense, who I think is going to kind of do what Notre Dame did, keep this thing low scoring, get in the fourth quarter, make Mertz beat you. And despite the struggles of the Iowa offense, I don't trust Mertz right now. So I'm going to call for Iowa to get a rare win in Madison and take back control of the Big Ten West, or at least set up probably another big game in a couple weeks in the Florida Rosedale game against the Gophers. That will probably determine who goes to Indy out of that side of the Big Ten. A couple good ACC games early, Miami and Pitt. Pitt trying to bounce, or now Pitt facing all the pressure on them. Miami trying to go for a second straight upset. We'll see how Pitt handles this spot. It's tricky. Miami's got some confidence after beating NC State last week. Pitt's clearly the coastal favorite. We've seen some letdowns from the Panthers in the past in these spots. Lost to Miami a couple years ago when you had a struggling Canes team go up to Pittsburgh and they knocked off Pitt. So tough spot for the Panthers, but I think that's a confident team, confident quarterback. Defense is starting to turn the corner a bit. I think Pitt survives, but I think that line's over a touchdown. So I'd be inclined to take those points with the Hurricanes going up to the Steel City. Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech. This could be it for Fuente. If this is the 4th straight loss and they go down to Atlanta and lose, I kind of think he lasts till the end of the season. I don't see them making an in-season move, but it's possible. If this is 4 straight losses and it's another second half collapse, it could happen as early as Saturday. So keep an eye on that one, Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech, down in Atlanta. Moving to the late afternoon, we got Washington State, Arizona State. Cougars' tough loss last week to BYU. Arizona State back on track after a week off coming down from that loss to Utah a couple weeks ago. Still in good shape in the Pac-12 South. Kind of a they'll need some help as well with Utah only having that one conference loss. So that's quite possible Utah can take their second loss on Saturday night against UCLA. So still very much a Pac-12 title contender, the Sun Devils, but haven't won in a couple weeks. So need to get back on track against Wazoo. Oklahoma will probably play their usual close game. Just interesting because it's Texas Tech, who fired Matt Wells earlier this week. So Sonny Cumbie's the interim. They'll head to Norman, and kind of like Vanderbilt, this is the 9th straight game for Oklahoma. That's the only comparison I'll make between Oklahoma and Vanderbilt probably all season. But the Sooners looking forward to that off week coming up, playing for the 9th week in a row. Can they finally put it all together and play a complete game? I can't predict it until it happens. I think they'll handle Texas Tech, but there could be some spotty moments again. But they'll survive, win by probably 14-17 over a Texas Tech team, but we're just not sure what to make of it. Will there be an interim coach bounce? Hard to tell with the way things have been trending in Lubbock over the past couple of weeks. Colorado, Oregon. Ducks are a massive favorite there. I don't see any issues there. Florida State, Clemson. We'll touch on that in best bets. Purdue, Nebraska in the Big Ten West. Both teams probably out of the division title race. But if Nebraska wants to get to a bowl, they need to take care of Purdue. They've still got Ohio State, Wisconsin, and Iowa to play down the stretch. TCU, Kansas State, kind of a similar spot there between teams not contending for a title, but both need to win desperately to ensure a bowl trip. And Minnesota Northwestern, again, Gophers very much alive. They control their destiny in the Big Ten West. They'll see Iowa and Wisconsin in November, but wouldn't want to take a bad loss on the road in Evanston on Saturday. And night games, SMU and Houston, big game in the American, both teams undefeated. Winner probably with the inside track there to face Cincinnati for the conference title. Houston does not play Cincinnati in the regular season. They got a great schedule this year. And SMU, of course, goes up to Cincinnati in the Saturday before Thanksgiving, and potentially the first of 2 meetings in the course of about 14 days there. Oregon State Cows in prime time. We have Penn State, Ohio State in prime time. That seems like it could get ugly. I think Penn State's defense is still pretty good, so it's a good test for the Ohio State offense. But with Sean Clifford still banged up, I have a hard time seeing Penn State really getting above about 24 points. And I think holding this Buckeye offense under 30, even for that Penn State defense, will be a challenge. North Carolina, Notre Dame, that's about a 3-point spread. Seems kind of low given the way the Irish have played, and North Carolina being a 3-loss team. But no Kyle Hamilton, so the Irish are down their best defensive player going against Sam Howell. They're coming down from playing USC, North Carolina coming off an off week. So some situational advantages there for the Tar Heels. But Notre Dame dominated the second half of that game last year in Chapel Hill. So I give the Irish the edge. They seem to find a way to win for the first time this year last week. They seem to stick to their game plan, be able to execute it, and not just have to scramble to pull a game out at the end like they were doing earlier in the year against Florida State, Wisconsin, Virginia Tech, and such. Louisville, NC State, interesting ACC game there. NC State probably can't afford another loss if they want to ensure that Wake Forest game in November becomes a winner-take-all game for the ACC Atlantics. They need to take care of business against a pretty good Louisville team back in Raleigh coming down from that loss at Miami last week. And that's about it for the primetime window. After Dark's really good. A lot of competitive, small point spread games. UCLA and Utah in the Pac-12 South. Bruins absolutely have to win this if they want to have any hopes of getting back in the division race. And Utah, again, they had a mulligan because of that head-to-head win over ASU. Took it last week up in Corvallis against Oregon State. And they may need to win out if they want to get to the Pac-12 championship game in Vegas. So good game late night there. Salt Lake City. Not sure about the weather, but if it is chilly, definitely a possible situational edge there for the Utes. Virginia, BYU, Bronco Mendenhall goes back to Provo for the first time. It's about a 2-3 point spread. We'll touch on that in best bets. Fun game there. BYU getting back on track after 2 straight losses last week by winning at Washington State. Virginia playing really good football since their 2-2 start and still very much in the coastal race. Obviously, this is not a conference game. They'll be out of conference for the next couple of weeks with BYU, their off week, and then Notre Dame, and finish up with a huge game at Pitt coming up on November 20th. Fresno State, San Diego State, big game in the Mountain West. Aztecs still undefeated. Fresno State heads back to Southern California, where they beat UCLA last month. Fun team again with that passing game. Jake Haener and Jalen Cropper. So will this be the week the Aztecs finally get picked off? They've answered the bell every time. Still undefeated. And if they keep winning, they're hoping to capitalize on maybe some some attrition in the American where those teams start to beat each other up. SMU, Houston, Cincinnati, maybe the lucky one to benefit from that is San Diego State, but they got to get through a tough one Saturday night against Fresno. And Washington, Stanford, Pac-12 game, not super interesting there. Neither team's been a whole lot of fun. Stanford's starting to struggle a bit after bouncing back and beating Oregon from their early loss to Kansas State. They kind of hit the skids a bit. I've lost to UCLA. I've lost to Washington State a couple weeks back. So loser of this game could be scrambling to get to a bowl between the Huskies and the Cardinal late Saturday night in Palo Alto. And we'll wrap it up with best bets. A couple games we touched on, some we didn't. Wake Forest, only 16.5 at home against Duke. I like the Deacons there. Virginia blasted the Blue Devils at home a couple weeks ago. Wake Forest destroyed Virginia earlier in this year doing the transitive property stuff. I think Duke's kind of fallen off a cliff there. 16.5 with that Wake Forest offense, I'm good there. UCLA, Utah, Bruins getting 6.5. Hate that number, but these two teams seem pretty even. This feels like a field goal game, so despite 6.5, you hate taking 6.5 because it's a bad number, but I'm going to do it with the Bruins. Michigan State, I touched on that earlier, 4.5. I think they went outright against Michigan, so I like Sparty. Florida State plus 10 against Clemson. Anytime you can get more than a touchdown against Clemson, I'm definitely going to take that. Noles playing some good football. They were de facto bye week last week, beat UMass. Had the win over North Carolina the previous week. So the Noles are starting to come together. Clemson probably going the other direction. So 10 points, even in Death Valley. I'll take FSU. And another bad number, but two teams that I feel are pretty even, that Virginia-BYU game. I love the way the Cavaliers are playing right now. That offense is really revved up with Brennan Armstrong in that passing game. Still not in love with this BYU offense right now with the quarterback derby they've had going in and out due to injuries. So 2.5, I look at that as a coin flip, essentially. I think Virginia wins this game outright, so I'll take the 2.5. Probably won't need them, but I think Virginia's to play there even late Saturday night in an altitude game in Provo. I think we'll call it there. So week 9 looks pretty good. Again, pretty light in the SEC, but nationally, a lot of good games, more spread out this week in terms of the viewing lineup. So I think it should be a pretty fun Saturday and a pretty good start to your Halloween weekend. So thanks so much for watching, guys. Please like, subscribe to the channel. Always just reach out to me on Twitter at MattSmithCFB. Written preview will be up later Wednesday night or Thursday morning on SouthernPigskin.com. I'll be back Sunday to recap it all, and I will talk to y'all later. See ya.